Power beyond imagination flowed through Marcus as he maintained contact with the heart of Luminara. He could feel the artifact's consciousness merging with his own, sharing knowledge that had been accumulated over millions of years. And with that knowledge came a revelation that changed everything he thought he understood about their situation. "Princess," Marcus said, his voice echoing strangely in the pocket dimension. "You need to see this. Marcus, release the heart immediately," Zarathel cried out. No non-luminary can safely channel that much energy. But instead of releasing his grip, Marcus reached out his free hand toward her. "Trust me. Let me show you what the heart has shown me." The Void Lord moved to intervene, but suddenly found itself unable to approach. The energy radiating from Marcus had created a barrier that the shadow creature could not penetrate. "Impossible," it hissed. "The artifact should have destroyed you instantly." Zarathel looked between Marcus and the approaching Void Lord, then made her decision. She took Marcus's outstretched hand, and immediately the heart's consciousness expanded to include her as well. What she saw there made her gasp in shock. The heart of Luminara was not just an artifact created by her people. It was something far older and more significant. It was, in fact, a seed, one of 12 seeds planted throughout the galaxy by a race so ancient that even their name had been forgotten. Each seed was designed to test the worthiness of the civilizations that found them, to determine whether those species were ready for the next phase of galactic evolution. "The Luminari were never meant to be the guardians forever," Marcus said, his consciousness still linked with the heart. "Your people were chosen as temporary caretakers until a species emerged that could bridge the gap between energy-based and biological life, a species like humans," Zarathel realized, understanding flooding through their shared connection. "A species like us together," Marcus corrected. "The heart has been waiting for this moment, not for one species to claim its power, but for two species to share it." The Void Lord's frustration was growing more violent by the moment. "Enough! You will release the heart now, or we will begin draining every human in our collection." But Marcus smiled, and there was something in his expression that made the shadow creature take a step back. "You know what's funny about your threat? I can see every ship in your fleet through the heart's perception, including the ones with human prisoners. What of it? There are no human prisoners." The silence that followed was deafening. Zarathel stared at Marcus through their shared consciousness. "What do you mean?" "The heart can perceive all life within its dimensional space. Those beings you thought were humans, they're shapeshifters. Every single one of them." Marcus turned his attention to the Void Lord. "This was all theater, wasn't it? You never captured any humans. You just wanted the princess to think you had." The Void Lord's form began to waver, as if its concentration was being disrupted. "How did you—" "The heart sees through all deceptions. It showed me the truth the moment I touched it." Marcus felt energy building within him, power that he was only beginning to understand. "But here's the really interesting part. You're not actually Void Collective either, are you?" "Marcus, what are you saying?" Zarathel asked. "Show them," Marcus said to the creature. "Show her what you really are." The Void Lord's form shimmered and collapsed, revealing the being underneath. Zarathel cried out in recognition and shock. "Solandra!" The revealed figure was Luminari, with the same elegant features and crystalline fingertips as Zarathel herself. But his energy patterns were twisted, corrupted by something dark and hungry. "Hello, sister," he said with a bitter smile. "But you died," Zarathel protested. "The Void Collective destroyed your ship 3 years ago." "The Void Collective recruited me 3 years ago," Solandra corrected. "I was dying, my life force nearly drained, when they offered me a choice. Serve them willingly and they would restore my energy using power stolen from others, or die slowly and painfully as they consumed me entirely. So you chose to betray everything our people stand for? I chose to survive, and when I learned of their plan to claim the heart, I offered to help them. Who better to manipulate the precious princess than her own beloved brother?" Marcus felt Zarathel's pain through their connection, but he also felt something else. The heart was showing him layers of deception within deceptions. "Except that's not the whole truth either," Marcus said. "Is it, Solandra?" The corrupted Luminari's expression flickered with uncertainty. "What do you mean?" "The heart sees everything, including your real motivations. You didn't volunteer to help the Void Collective claim its power. You're trying to get close enough to destroy it." "Marcus, that's impossible," Zarathel said. "The heart cannot be destroyed by conventional means. No, but it can be destroyed by someone willing to sacrifice themselves to detonate their own life force in direct contact with its core. Marcus looked at Solandra with something approaching respect. You've been planning this for 3 years, haven't you? Infiltrating the Void Collective, gaining their trust, bringing them here where you could destroy both them and the heart in one massive explosion. Solandra's shoulders sagged in defeat. How could you possibly know that? Because the heart has been preparing for this moment too. It knew that someone would eventually try to destroy it, rather than let it fall into evil hands. But it also knew that there was another way. Marcus felt the artifact's consciousness expand around them, encompassing not just the pocket dimension, but reaching out toward the approaching luminary fleet and even touching the corrupted Void Collective ships. The heart doesn't need to be destroyed or claimed, Marcus continued. It needs to be released. Its power was always meant to be shared freely among all worthy species, not hoarded by any single group. And how exactly do we do that? Zarathel asked. Marcus smiled and tightened his grip on both her hand and the heart itself. Together. The artifact pulsed once, and suddenly energy began flowing outward from their joined hands. Not the dark, draining power of the Void Collective, but pure life force that sought to heal and strengthen rather than consume. The corrupted ships in the Void Fleet began to change as the energy touched them. Organic hulls that had been twisted into instruments of consumption slowly transformed back into their original forms. The beings aboard who had been partially drained found their life forces restored. This is impossible, Solandra breathed. The Void Collective cannot be redeemed. The collective was made up of beings who chose corruption to survive, Marcus replied. But given the option to reclaim their original nature, most of them are choosing differently. Through the heart's expanded awareness, Marcus could see the true scope of what was happening. Across the galaxy, the other 11 seeds were responding to the activation of the heart of Luminara. Ancient barriers between species were dissolving. Energy-based beings like the Luminari were forming connections with biological species like humans. The next phase of galactic evolution was beginning. What about me? Solandra asked quietly. I have done terrible things in service to the collective. Zarathel released Marcus's hand long enough to reach toward her brother. When their fingers touched, the heart's healing energy flowed through her into him. The corruption that had twisted his life force began to dissolve, leaving behind the brother she remembered. You tried to save the galaxy the only way you knew how, she said gently. That intention matters more than the methods you were forced to use. As the last of the Void Collective ships completed their transformation, Marcus felt the heart's consciousness beginning to withdraw from his mind, but not before it shared one final revelation. Princess, he said, turning to Zarathel with wonder in his eyes, the heart has chosen us to be its new guardians, not just of this artifact, but of all 12 seeds throughout the galaxy. Both of us, human and Luminari, working together to help other species discover what we've learned here. The age of isolated civilizations is ending, and the age of cooperative evolution is beginning. Zarathel looked at him with those incredible violet eyes, and Marcus saw his own amazement reflected there. Are you prepared for such a responsibility, Marcus Chen? Marcus thought about his simple life as a salvage operator, about the comfortable routine he had given up the moment he decided to rescue an alien princess. Then he looked at the woman he loved and the galaxy full of possibilities that stretched out before them. With you, he said, pulling her close as the heart of Luminara pulsed with approval around them. I'm ready for anything. And in the pocket dimension that had hidden the galaxy's greatest secret, two beings from different worlds began the work of reshaping the future for countless civilizations yet to come. The dimensional gateway opened like a wound in space itself, revealing the pocket dimension that had hidden the heart of Luminara for 10 millennia. Marcus pressed his face against the transparent wall of their prison chamber and watched in awe as the Void Collective's living ship approached the most sacred site in Luminari history. The heart was beautiful beyond description. It floated in the center of a crystalline pocket dimension, a structure that seemed to be made of pure energy given solid form. Streams of light flowed around it in complex patterns, and Marcus could feel its power even through the ship's bioorganic hull. It was like standing near a star, but instead of heat, it radiated pure life force. It is magnificent, Zarathel whispered beside him. Despite their desperate situation, Her voice carried notes of wonder and reverence. "I have seen it only in the sacred visions passed down through my bloodline, to witness it with my own eyes. It's going to be the last thing any of us see if we can't figure out how to stop this," Marcus replied grimly. The Void Lord had moved them to an observation chamber near the ship's navigation center, claiming it would allow Zarathel to properly commune with the heart before opening its defenses. But Marcus suspected the real reason was that the creature wanted to savor the moment of its ultimate victory. Through the chamber's living walls, Marcus could see dozens of Void collective ships converging on the pocket dimension. Some were like the vessel that held them, grown rather than built, while others appeared to be captured and corrupted vessels from 100 different species. It was a fleet large enough to conquer star systems, all gathered to witness the opening of the heart. "Princess," Marcus said quietly, "is there any way to access the heart without giving them what they want?" "The defenses are absolute," she replied. "Only one of my bloodline approaching with pure intent can safely access the heart's power. Any deception, any trace of evil purpose, and the dimensional barriers will collapse. Everything within 100 light-years will be destroyed." Marcus thought about that for a moment. Everything? The heart's defensive mechanism does not discriminate. Good or evil, innocent or guilty, all would perish if it detects corruption in the one who seeks to access it. Including this entire Void collective fleet? Zarathel turned to look at him with growing understanding in her violet eyes. "Yes, but Marcus, you and I would die as well, and every living thing in this region of space." "How many star systems are we talking about?" "Perhaps 20 inhabited worlds. Billions of lives." Marcus stared out at the heart of Luminara, feeling the weight of an impossible decision. Save billions by allowing the Void collective to drain all life from the galaxy, or sacrifice billions to prevent that greater catastrophe. "There has to be another way," he said. But before Zarathel could respond, the Void Lord entered their chamber. The creature's presence immediately made the air feel colder and harder to breathe. "It is time, Princess," the being said. "Our calculations indicate that the dimensional barriers are at their weakest point in the cycle. If you are to access the heart, it must be now." "I need more time to prepare the mental communion," Zarathel said, though Marcus could hear the desperation she was trying to hide. "You have had sufficient time. Our sensors indicate that Luminari warships are approaching the outer perimeter of this dimension. Your people have found us, which means we must accelerate our schedule." Through the transparent walls, Marcus could indeed see distant flashes of light that might have been weapon discharges. The cavalry was coming, but they were still too far away to intervene in time. "Bring the human," the Void Lord commanded. Two more of the shadow creatures entered and seized Marcus before he could resist. Their touch was like being grabbed by frozen death itself, and he felt his life energy begin to drain wherever they made contact. "Where are you taking him?" Zarathel demanded. "To the heart chamber, of course. You will need proper motivation to ensure your compliance." They were transported through the ship's organic corridors to a chamber that opened directly onto space. Through a barrier of energy that felt like walking through water, Marcus found himself floating in the pocket dimension itself, surrounded by the incredible radiance of the heart of Luminara. The artifact was even more magnificent up close. It pulsed with rhythms that seemed to match his heartbeat, and the energy flowing around it created patterns that were almost musical in their complexity. Marcus could feel it examining him, probing his mind and soul with a gentle touch that somehow conveyed vast intelligence and benevolence. "Remarkable," the Void Lord said as it joined them in the dimensional space. "The heart recognizes your human companion as one who has acted selflessly. It actually welcomes his presence." Zarathel floated near the heart, her own inner light responding to its radiance. For a moment, her energy patterns synchronized with the artifacts, and Marcus saw her as she truly was, not just a princess, but a living conduit for one of the universe's most fundamental forces. "I can feel it calling to me," she said in wonder. "It wants to share its power, to help me protect the galaxy from the darkness." "Yes," the Void Lord hissed. "Open yourself to it. Let it merge with your life force." But Marcus could see what Zarathel could not. Behind the Void Lord, more of The shadow creatures were positioning themselves in a complex pattern around the heart. They had some kind of energy siphoning devices, technological parasites designed to drain the artifact's power once its defenses were lowered. "Princess, it's a trap," Marcus shouted. "They're going to drain the heart the moment you access it." The Void Lord turned toward him with what might have been amusement. "Your human is more perceptive than expected. Yes, Princess, we will indeed claim the heart's power once you have opened the way, but consider the alternative." The creature gestured, and suddenly Marcus was surrounded by images of the humans he had seen suspended in energy cocoons. But now they were awake and they were screaming as their life force was slowly extracted. "Choose quickly," the Void Lord continued. "Open the heart and grant us its power, or watch as we drain every human in our collection. The decision is yours." Zarathel looked between Marcus and the heart, agony written across her luminous features. Marcus could see the moment when her resolve cracked. "I am sorry," she whispered, reaching toward the heart of Luminara. But as her fingers approached the artifact's surface, Marcus made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He broke free from the energy field holding him and threw himself between Zarathel and the heart. "Wait," he called out. "There's something you need to know." "Marcus, what are you doing?" "Princess, you said the heart responds to pure intent, right? That it can tell good from evil?" "Yes, but then let me try to access it." The Void Lord laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Foolish human. The heart responds only to luminary bloodlines. You would be destroyed instantly." "Maybe," Marcus said, placing his hand on the heart's surface. "But maybe not." The moment his palm made contact with the artifact, the entire pocket dimension exploded into light. Energy poured through Marcus like a river of liquid fire, and for an instant he could perceive the entire galaxy spread out before him like a vast web of interconnected life. And in that moment of cosmic awareness, Marcus understood exactly what needed to be done. The heart had indeed recognized him as someone who acted without thought of personal gain, but more than that, it had seen the love between him and Zarathel, a connection that transcended species and opened new possibilities for its ancient power. "I know what you want," Marcus said to the heart, though he wasn't sure if he spoke aloud or directly into its vast consciousness. "And I know what needs to happen." The artifact pulsed once in acknowledgement, and suddenly Marcus found himself holding more power than any single being should ever possess, power enough to save the galaxy or destroy it. The battle was over almost before it began. The Luminary rescue ships cut through the asteroid outpost's defenses like they were made of paper, but Marcus and Zarathel never got to see the conclusion. The shapeshifters had released some kind of neural gas into the escape pod, and despite Marcus's best efforts to hold his breath, consciousness faded from his mind like water draining from a broken tank. When Marcus awoke, he immediately knew something was very wrong. The surface beneath him was too smooth, too warm, and it pulsed with a rhythm that reminded him uncomfortably of a heartbeat. He opened his eyes to find himself lying on what appeared to be a living floor in a room that definitely wasn't part of any ship he'd ever seen. The walls curved organically around him, their surface covered in patterns that shifted and moved like oil on water. Bioluminescent veins ran through everything, providing a sickly green light that made his skin look pale and corpse-like. The air itself felt thick and somehow hungry. "You are awake," a familiar musical voice said from beside him. Marcus turned his head and saw Zarathel sitting against the curved wall nearby. She was alive and apparently unharmed, but something was different about her. The inner light that had always emanated from her skin was much dimmer now, flickering like a candle flame in a strong wind. "Where are we?" Marcus asked, struggling to sit up. His body felt heavy and sluggish, as if his blood had been replaced with syrup. "A Void Collective harvesting ship," she replied. "They brought us here after their shapeshifters captured us at the outpost." Marcus looked around the organic chamber more carefully. There were no obvious doors or windows, just the seamless curves of living wall. "How long have we been here?" 3 days by my estimation. "You have been unconscious longer than I expected. The neural gas affects different species in different ways." 3 days. Marcus felt a surge of panic. "What have they done to you?" Zarathel held up her hands, and Marcus could see that the crystalline structures at her fingertips were noticeably darker than before. "They are draining me slowly," she said matter-of-factly. taking just enough of my life energy to keep me weak but not enough to kill me quickly. They seem to be savoring the process. There has to be a way out of here. I have examined every surface of this chamber multiple times. The walls are not just grown, they are alive. They respond to my attempts to escape by becoming harder and more resistant. She gestured to several areas where the wall surface was noticeably different in texture. I believe this entire ship is a single organism, bred specifically for containing energy-based life forms. Marcus stood up and immediately regretted it as dizziness washed over him. Whatever they had used to keep him unconscious was still affecting his system. What about your rescue ships? Did they follow us? I do not know. The Void Collective has ways of masking their trail that even our technology cannot easily penetrate. Zarathel's voice carried a note of despair that Marcus had never heard from her before. Marcus, there is something I must tell you. What? The reason they have not simply drained me completely is because they need my cooperation for their ultimate plan. They are taking me to the heart of Luminara. Marcus sat down heavily beside her. The artifact you mentioned before? More than an artifact. It is the source of my people's power, the wellspring from which all our energy abilities flow. It has been hidden in a pocket dimension for 10,000 years, accessible only through specific genetic codes and mental patterns. And you have those codes? I am the only living being who possesses them all. My family line has been its guardian since the ancient wars. She turned those violet eyes toward him, and Marcus could see the weight of millennia of responsibility in their depths. If the Void Collective gains control of the heart, they will be able to drain the life force from every living thing in the galaxy. Every living thing. Every planet, every star system, every form of biological and energy-based life. They would turn the entire galaxy into a lifeless void, with themselves as the only remaining conscious entities. Her voice dropped to a whisper. They have been planning this for centuries, Marcus. Everything they have done, every race they have consumed, has been preparation for this moment. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of their living prison. So why haven't they forced you to open it already? Because the heart has defenses. Approach it with evil intent, and it will destroy anyone within 100 light years of its location. They need me to willingly open the way, believing that I am acting to save lives rather than doom them. And they think they can convince you to do that? Zarathel was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. They have you, Marcus. Before he could ask what she meant, a section of the wall began to iris open like a living aperture. The creature that entered was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. It was tall and roughly humanoid in shape, but its body seemed to be made of darkness given form. Energy crackled around it like black lightning, and where its face should have been, there was only a void that hurt to look at directly. Princess Zarathel, the creature said in a voice like wind through a cemetery. I trust you have had time to consider our proposition. I have told you my answer, Void Lord, she replied with as much dignity as she could muster. I will never open the way to the heart, perhaps. But I think you may feel differently after you see what we have prepared for your human companion. The creature gestured, and the wall behind it became transparent. Through it, Marcus could see into another chamber where dozens of humans were suspended in what looked like energy cocoons. They were all unconscious, but he could see their life energy being slowly drained away in visible streams of light. We have been collecting humans for some time, the Void Lord continued conversationally. Your species has such interesting energy patterns. The neural pathways are complex enough to provide entertainment during the draining process. Marcus felt sick. Those people are still alive? Oh yes. Death would end their usefulness. We prefer to keep our food fresh. The creature's attention turned back to Zarathel. Your companion will join them if you continue to refuse our reasonable request. You call the destruction of all life in the galaxy reasonable? We call it efficient. Life is chaotic and wasteful. We will bring order to the cosmos. Zarathel stood up, and despite her weakened condition, she managed to project an aura of royal authority. I will not betray my people and everything they stand for, no matter what you threaten. Even if the threat is to someone you have come to care for? The Void Lord moved closer to Marcus, and he could feel cold emanating from the creature like a physical force. We have observed the energy patterns between you, Princess. You have developed what your species calls affection for this human. Marcus saw Zarathel flinch, and he realized the alien had found her weakness. She would sacrifice herself to save others, but Could she sacrifice him? Princess, Marcus said quietly. Don't do it. Whatever they want, don't give it to them. How touching, the Void Lord said, but ultimately irrelevant. You will both serve our purposes, willing or not. The only question is whether the process will be pleasant or educational. The creature raised its hand and dark energy began building around its fingers. Marcus could feel the life being pulled from his body, a sensation like drowning in reverse. Every breath became harder, every heartbeat more labored. Stop, Zarathil cried out. I will consider your offer, but I need time to prepare the proper mental state for accessing the heart. How much time? 1 day? The access rituals cannot be rushed without risking permanent damage to the dimensional barriers. The Void Lord considered this, and the draining sensation stopped. Marcus gasped and fell to his knees, feeling like he had just run a marathon. 1 day, the creature agreed. But know this, Princess. If you attempt any deception, we will drain every human on this ship slowly enough that their screams will last for weeks. The being departed, and the wall sealed itself behind it. Marcus looked up at Zarathel and saw tears flowing down her luminescent cheeks. I am sorry, Marcus, she whispered. I cannot let them hurt you. Princess, you can't seriously be considering this. What choice do I have? She sank down beside him, her energy almost completely depleted. I love you, Marcus Chen. I cannot watch you die for my principles. Marcus stared at her in shock. In all the chaos and danger they had faced together, he had not allowed himself to acknowledge what he had been feeling. But hearing her say those words, he realized that somewhere between rescuing her from the Krillians and fighting shapeshifters together, he had fallen completely in love with this remarkable alien princess. I love you too, he said quietly. But that's exactly why you can't do this. If you give them what they want, everyone dies, everyone. I know, she whispered, but I cannot bear to lose you. They held each other in the pulsing green light of their living prison, while outside the walls, the Void Collective's ship carried them toward the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known. The Luminary outpost appeared on their sensors like a small jewel against the darkness of space. It was built into an asteroid, its crystalline structures extending from the rocky surface in elegant spirals that caught and reflected starlight. To Marcus, it looked like something from a dream, beautiful and impossibly delicate. Finally, he breathed, allowing himself to feel a moment of relief as their battered escape pod approached the docking bay. The Void ships had fallen behind during the last hour of their flight, apparently still dealing with the damage Zarathel had inflicted on their lead vessel. But the princess didn't share his relief. She was staring at the outpost with a troubled expression, her violet eyes reflecting the glow of the navigation displays. Something is wrong, she said quietly. What do you mean? This is your people's station, right? Yes, but... She leaned forward, studying the sensor readings. There should be at least 3 ships docked here. I see only one, and its configuration is not familiar to me. Marcus checked the communications panel. They're responding to our docking request with the proper codes. Everything looks normal. Appearances can be deceiving, Marcus Chen, especially when dealing with beings who can manipulate energy as my people do. Despite her concerns, they had little choice. Their escape pod's life support was failing, and they were running on reserve power. Marcus guided the craft into the outpost docking bay, which sealed around them with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure. Through the pod's viewport, Marcus could see figures moving in the bay. They were tall and elegant like Zarathel, with the same luminescent skin and crystalline fingertips. But something about their movement seemed wrong, too precise and coordinated. Those are not my people, Zarathel said with certainty. How can you tell? Watch how they move. Luminary have individual patterns of energy flow that affect our physical gestures. These beings move in perfect synchronization, as if they share a single consciousness. Marcus was about to ask what that meant when the airlock request chimed. Someone wanted to board their pod. Should we answer it? Zarathel closed her eyes and placed her hands flat on the control panel. The crystals at her fingertips began to glow softly. I can sense multiple energy signatures outside, but they feel hollow, like shells containing something else entirely. The airlock chimed again, more insistently this time. Princess Zarathel, a voice came through the communication system. It sounded like her people's musical language, but with an undertone that made Marcus's skin crawl. Welcome to Outpost Thyril. Please open your airlock so we may greet you properly. Shapeshifters, Zarathel whispered. They have taken the forms of my people, but they cannot perfectly replicate our energy signatures. What do we do? Before she could answer, the decision was made for them. The pod's airlock began cycling open from the outside. Whoever was out there had override codes for Luminari technology. Stay behind me, Zarathel said, rising from her seat. Energy began to gather around her hands, crackling between her fingertips like contained lightning. 3 figures entered the escape pod. They looked exactly like Luminari, tall and graceful with glowing skin and violet eyes. But Marcus could see what Zarathel meant about their movements. They moved like puppets controlled by the same hand, turning their heads in perfect unison to look at the princess. Sister, the center figure said with a smile that didn't reach its eyes. Father has been so worried about you. I have no sisters, Zarathel replied coldly. And my father would never send agents who reek of the void. The false Luminari's expressions didn't change, but the temperature in the pod suddenly dropped several degrees. You are more perceptive than we expected, Princess. But it matters little. You will come with us. I think not. Zarathel raised her hands and brilliant energy exploded from her fingertips. The blast should have vaporized the 3 shapeshifters instantly, but instead it seemed to be absorbed into their bodies. Their false Luminari forms flickered for a moment, revealing glimpses of something dark and twisted underneath, before stabilizing again. Void touched, Zarathel breathed. They are already partially drained. My energy only feeds them. The center figure's smile widened, showing teeth that were suddenly far too sharp. Indeed, Princess. We are no longer truly alive, which makes us immune to your people's abilities. We serve the collective willingly now, and soon you will join us. Marcus had heard enough. While the shapeshifters were focused on Zarathel, he grabbed his plasma cutter and triggered it at maximum power. The superheated beam caught the nearest false Luminari across the torso, and this time there was a satisfying result. The creature screamed and collapsed, its disguise failing completely to reveal something that looked like a cross between a spider and a nightmare. The other 2 turned toward Marcus with expressions of surprise. Apparently they had dismissed him as irrelevant. The human has interesting reflexes, one of them said conversationally. Perhaps he will provide entertainment before we drain him completely. Marcus, run! Zarathel shouted, but there was nowhere to run. They were trapped in a small escape pod, with 2 creatures that could absorb energy and probably had reinforcements waiting outside. Marcus looked around desperately for anything that might help, and his eyes fell on the pod's emergency self-destruct mechanism. It was a last resort option, designed to prevent valuable technology from falling into enemy hands. If triggered, it would vaporize the entire pod and everything within 50 meters of it. Princess, Marcus said quietly, not taking his eyes off the shapeshifters. How long can you protect yourself from a plasma explosion? What are you thinking? Something probably very stupid. One of the false Luminari took a step toward them, and Marcus could see dark energy beginning to flow around its hands. Enough conversation. You will both come with us now, or we will begin the draining process here. Marcus's hand moved toward the self-destruct control. I've got a better idea. But before he could trigger the device, Zarathel grabbed his wrist. Wait, she said urgently. There is another way. She closed her eyes and began to glow brighter than Marcus had ever seen before. The light emanating from her skin became so intense that he had to shield his eyes. The shapeshifters took a step back, hissing in what might have been pain or anger. I am calling to my people, she said through gritted teeth, broadcasting our location on frequencies that only true Luminari can hear. If any of them are within range, they will come. And if none of them are within range, then we die fighting. The 2 remaining shapeshifters were advancing again, their false forms becoming more unstable as Zarathel's energy call interfered with their disguises. Marcus could see their true shapes flickering in and out of visibility, things of shadow and hunger that made his stomach turn. Your people will not arrive in time, Princess, one of them said. And when we are finished with you, we will hunt down every Luminari in this sector. The collective's hunger is infinite. Marcus raised his plasma cutter, knowing it would probably only slow them down. Come on then, if you're coming. But suddenly the outpost's hull began to vibrate with a deep thrumming sound. Through the pod's viewport, Marcus could see new ships dropping out of hyperspace around the asteroid. These vessels were clearly Luminari in origin. All flowing lines and crystalline projections that glowed with inner, Light, the cavalry, Marcus Yule breathed. The shapeshifters looked at each other with expressions that might have been worry if they had been capable of genuine emotion. One of them spoke rapidly into a communication device in a language that sounded like breaking glass. "They are calling for evacuation," Zarathel translated, "but it may be too late for us." The false luminary turned back to them with desperate hunger in their stolen eyes. "If we cannot take you alive, Princess, we will settle for your drained corpse." Dark energy began building around both creatures, and Marcus realized they were about to discover just how much damage void-touched shapeshifters could do in close quarters. He tightened his grip on the plasma cutter and prepared to make his last stand alongside the most remarkable being he had ever met. Outside, the real luminary ships were closing in on the outpost, but Marcus wasn't sure they would arrive in time to matter. The escape pod's proximity alarms began screaming, just as Marcus was starting to think they might actually make it to the luminary outpost. He quickly checked the sensors and felt his heart sink. 3 ships had dropped out of hyperspace directly ahead of them, their sleek forms cutting through the starfield like predatory fish. "Those aren't Krillian vessels," Marcus said, studying the sensor readouts. The ships were too elegant, too organic-looking. They seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, making them difficult to track visually. Zarathel leaned over to look at the displays, and Marcus saw her face go pale. "Void Collective," she whispered. "They found us faster than I expected. Friends of yours?" "The opposite of friends." Her hands clenched into fists, and the crystals at her fingertips began to glow with agitation. "They are the reason my people withdrew from the outer territories 2 centuries ago. They consume life force itself, Marcus. They feed on the energy that flows through all living beings." Marcus tried to change course, but the 3 ships had already positioned themselves to cut off any escape route. The pod's communication system crackled to life, and a voice that sounded like wind blowing through a graveyard filled the tiny cabin. "Princess Zarathel of the Luminari," the voice said in perfect English. "You will surrender yourself to us immediately. Resist and we will make your death last for centuries." "Cheerful bunch," Marcus muttered, checking their weapon systems. The escape pod had minimal defensive capabilities, just a single plasma cannon with enough charge for maybe 6 shots. "Can we outrun them?" "Not in this vessel," Zarathel replied. "But Marcus, there is something you must know about the Void Collective. They cannot simply take me by force. Their feeding requires willing surrender or complete psychic domination. As long as I resist, they cannot drain my life energy." "And what about me?" Her expression grew troubled. "You are human. Your species has natural resistance to psychic manipulation that even my people find remarkable, but you are not immune." The 3 void ships began closing in, their dark hulls seeming to bend light around them. Marcus could see energy patterns playing across their surfaces like black lightning. "Princess," the voice came again, and this time it seemed to echo inside Marcus's skull. "You cannot run forever. Surrender now and we will make your companion's death swift." "How kind of them," Marcus said through gritted teeth. He suddenly had an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane. "Princess, how much energy can you channel at once?" "What do you mean?" "Back on the ship, you overloaded the lighting systems. Could you do the same thing to their ship's sensors?" Zarathel considered this. "Possibly, but it would require direct contact with their energy systems. I would need to be much closer." "How much closer?" "Close enough to touch their hull." Marcus stared at her. "You want to go outside and touch their ship? In the vacuum of space? My people can survive in vacuum for short periods," she explained. "Our physiology is different from yours. But Marcus, if I try this and fail, we will both die." The void ships were now close enough that Marcus could see details of their construction. They looked grown rather than built, all flowing curves and organic-looking surfaces. Dark energy crackled between projections that might have been weapons or sensory organs. "How long can you survive out there?" "Perhaps 10 minutes in this environment. Less if I am exerting myself." Marcus began calculating angles and distances. It was a crazy plan, but it might be their only chance. "What do you need me to do?" "Get me as close to the lead ship as possible. When I signal, seal the airlock and move away quickly. I will attempt to overload their navigation and weapon systems." Before Marcus could object to the incredible danger of what she was proposing, Zarathel was already moving toward the pod's small airlock. She paused at the entrance and looked back at him. "Marcus Chen, if something happens to me, you must promise to tell my people what the Void Collective is planning. They are not here for me alone. They seek something far more dangerous, and what are they after? The heart of Luminara, an artifact that my family has guarded for 10,000 years. With it, they could drain the life force from entire star systems. Her violet eyes were intense with urgency. Promise me. I promise, Marcus said, though he had no idea how he would ever reach her people if she died. Zarathel smiled, and for a moment her whole body seemed to glow with inner light. You're a good man, Marcus Chen. Perhaps the best I have ever known. She cycled through the airlock before he could respond. Marcus watched through the small porthole as she emerged into the vacuum of space. Her skin was glowing brighter now, creating a protective field around her body. She looked like a small star drifting between the ships. Marcus piloted the pod closer to the lead void vessel, his hands steady on the controls despite the terror coursing through his veins. The alien ship was massive up close, easily 100 times larger than their tiny escape pod. Its dark surface writhed with patterns that hurt to look at directly. Through the porthole, he saw Zarathel reach out and place her hands against the void ship's hull. Immediately, brilliant energy began arcing between her fingertips and the alien vessel's surface. The princess's body was now blazing like a miniature sun, and Marcus had to look away to avoid being blinded. The void ship began to convulse. Energy patterns that had been flowing smoothly across its surface became chaotic, sparking and flashing randomly. Marcus heard alarms begin sounding from the alien vessel, though he couldn't understand the language. But something was wrong. Zarathel was supposed to signal him when to move away, but she hadn't given any indication. Through the porthole, Marcus could see that she was locked in some kind of struggle with the ship itself. Dark tendrils of energy had emerged from the hull and were wrapping around her arms and legs. The Void Collective was trying to drain her energy even as she attempted to overload their systems. Marcus didn't hesitate. He triggered the pod's plasma cannon and put all 6 shots directly into the section of hull where the princess was trapped. The explosions tore through the alien ship's surface, severing the dark tendrils and freeing Zarathel. She immediately pushed off from the damaged hull and began floating back toward the escape pod. But she was moving too slowly, and Marcus could see that her inner light was flickering weakly. The brief contact with the void ship had drained much of her energy. The other 2 void vessels were closing in, and the damaged ship was beginning to regenerate its hull plating where Marcus had shot it. They had maybe seconds before the aliens re-established their weapons lock. Marcus opened the pod's airlock and reached out to grab Zarathel as she drifted close. Her skin was cold to the touch and her eyes were only half open. He pulled her inside and sealed the lock just as energy beams began lancing past them. Did it work? He asked as he strapped her into the co-pilot's seat. Partially, she whispered. Their navigation systems are damaged, but not critically. We have perhaps 5 minutes before they can pursue effectively. Marcus was already pushing the pod's engines to maximum. The little craft wasn't built for this kind of abuse, but it responded gamely, shooting away from the void ships at its maximum acceleration. There, Zarathel pointed weakly at a distant point of light, the luminary outpost. Can we reach it? Marcus checked their fuel and engine status. It would be close, but they might just make it if nothing else went wrong. Behind them, the void ships were beginning to give chase, but their damaged lead vessel was clearly having trouble maintaining course. We're going to make it, Marcus said with more confidence than he felt. But even as they raced toward the supposed safety of the luminary outpost, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were just beginning. The princess had mentioned that using her abilities sent signals across the galaxy. How many other enemies were now converging on their position? Zarathel seemed to sense his thoughts. I am sorry, Marcus, she said quietly. I have brought great danger into your life. Lady, my life was pretty boring before I met you, Marcus replied. At least now I'll have interesting stories to tell, if he lived long enough to tell them. Marcus led Princess Zarathel through the twisting corridors of his ship, his plasma cutter held ready. The solitary dawn had never felt so much like a maze before, every shadow potentially hiding another Krillian raider. Behind him, the princess moved with surprising grace despite her ordeal, her bare feet making no sound on the metal deck plates. How many more are there? Marcus whispered as they reached a junction in the corridor. I counted at least 12 when they brought me aboard, Zarathel replied, her musical voice barely audible. But Marcus Chen, there is something you must understand. These are not ordinary raiders. Marcus paused at the corner and risked a quick look down the adjacent hallway. Empty, but he could hear movement somewhere in the distance. What do you mean? They are shadow hunters, elite warriors of the Krillian Empire, sent specifically to capture me. Her violet eyes reflected the dim emergency lighting. My father is the High Chancellor of the Luminari Collective. Taking me gives them significant leverage in the current peace negotiations. Peace negotiations? Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's recycled air. Lady, I'm just a salvage operator. I don't know anything about galactic politics. Zarathel placed her hand on his arm, and Marcus was surprised by how warm her touch was. Her skin seemed to pulse with that inner light he had noticed before. You know enough, she said. You know right from wrong. That is more than many beings possess. They moved through the ship toward the docking bay where Marcus kept his escape pod. It was a standard emergency craft, barely large enough for 2 people, but it would get them away from the solitary dawn before the Krillians decided to destroy it entirely. As they approached the bay, Marcus heard the unmistakable sound of energy weapons being charged. He held up a hand, stopping Zarathel, and peered around the corner. 3 shadow hunters stood between them and the escape pod, their weapons trained on the corridor entrance. They anticipated our route, the princess whispered. Shadow hunters are cunning strategists. Marcus studied the layout of the docking bay. The escape pod was maybe 30 feet away, but there was no cover between their position and the craft. The Krillians had positioned themselves perfectly to catch anyone trying to reach it. Is there another way? He asked. Zarathel closed her eyes for a moment, and the crystalline structures at her fingertips began to glow softly. I can sense the ship's energy patterns. There is a maintenance tunnel that leads directly under the docking bay, but it will put us very close to their position. Close enough to surprise them? Perhaps. But Marcus, you should know that I am not entirely helpless. She opened her eyes, and for a moment they seemed to glow with the same inner light as her skin. My people have certain abilities that yours do not. Before Marcus could ask what she meant, she was moving toward a maintenance hatch in the floor. Her fingers traced patterns over the lock mechanism, and the crystals at her fingertips pulsed brighter. The hatch opened with a soft click. They dropped into the narrow tunnel beneath the deck plates. The space was cramped and filled with power conduits and life support systems. Marcus had to crawl on his hands and knees, but somehow Zarathel managed to move through the confined space with fluid elegance. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, they reached a position directly under the escape pod. Above them, Marcus could hear the shadow hunters moving around, their clicking communications filled with growing impatience. Now what? Marcus whispered. Zarathel placed her hands flat against the deck plating above them. The crystals on her fingertips began to glow brighter, and Marcus felt a strange tingling in the air around them. My people can manipulate certain forms of energy, she explained softly. I am going to overload the lighting systems in the docking bay. When the lights fail, we must move immediately. You can do that? I can do many things, Marcus Chen, but such abilities come with a price. Her expression grew serious. Using them reveals my location to others who possess similar capabilities. Every time I employ my gifts, I send out ripples through what you might call the energy web that connects all living things. Marcus didn't fully understand what she was talking about, but he could see the concentration on her face as she prepared to act. Are you saying there are others looking for you besides the Krillians? There are always others, she said quietly. Power calls to power across the galaxy, but we will worry about that later. The deck plating above them suddenly grew warm under Zarathel's touch. Marcus heard a humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once, and then the lights in the docking bay began to flicker. The shadow hunters' clicking communications took on an urgent tone. Now, Zarathel whispered. Marcus kicked out the access panel above them and hauled himself up into the docking bay. The lights were strobing wildly, creating a disorienting display of shadows and brilliant flashes. The 3 Krillians were looking around in confusion, their weapons still ready but no longer aimed at the escape pod. Marcus didn't hesitate. He rolled toward the nearest shadow hunter and triggered his plasma cutter, catching the alien across its legs. As it toppled, he was already moving toward the second one. Behind him, he could hear Zarathel emerging from the maintenance tunnel. The second Krillian spotted him and raised its weapon, but something extraordinary happened. Zarathel stepped into view, and suddenly the air around her seemed to shimmer with energy. She raised her hand and lightning arced from her fingertips to the Shadowhunter's weapon. The energy rifle exploded in the alien's grasp, sending fragments of metal and circuitry across the docking bay. The third Krillian turned toward the princess, recognizing the greater threat. Marcus saw his opportunity and tackled the creature from behind, driving his plasma cutter deep into the gap between its head and torso. The alien dropped immediately. "The escape pod," Zarathel said urgently. "More will come soon." They ran to the small craft and tumbled inside. Marcus sealed the hatch and began the launch sequence, his hands flying over the controls with practiced efficiency. Behind them, he could hear more Shadowhunters entering the docking bay. The escape pod shot out of the solitary dawn just as energy beams began filling the space where it had been docked. Marcus engaged the pod's minimal engine and sent them racing away from his ship into the darkness of space. "Where can we go?" Zarathel asked as she strapped herself into the co-pilot's seat. Marcus checked their position and fuel reserves. They had maybe 6 hours of flight time before the pod systems began to fail. "There's a refueling station at Kepler 7. It's neutral territory and they don't ask questions if you pay in hard currency." "That will not be far enough," the princess said quietly. "The Shadowhunters will follow us, and they are not the only ones who will be looking now." "What do you mean?" Zarathel touched her fingertips together, and the crystals flickered with residual energy. "When I used my abilities back there, I sent out a signal that traveled faster than light itself. Every sensitive being within a dozen star systems now knows approximately where I am." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "How many are we talking about?" "I do not know," she admitted, "but among them will be others of my people, some who serve my father and some who do not. There will be bounty hunters from a dozen different species, and there will be agents of the Void Collective." "The Void Collective?" Zarathel's expression grew grim. "Ancient enemies of the Luminari. They have been searching for me for a very long time. Marcus Chen. They believe that my bloodline holds the key to a power that could reshape the galaxy itself." Marcus stared at her, beginning to understand just how much trouble he had gotten himself into by rescuing this beautiful alien princess. "And you're telling me this now because you deserve to know the truth before you decide whether to help me further." She turned those violet eyes on him, and Marcus felt something shift in his chest. "You have already risked your life to save mine. I will not ask you to do more unless you choose to do so freely." Outside the escape pod's small viewport, stars wheeled slowly past in the eternal darkness. Marcus thought about his simple life as a salvage operator, about the comfortable routine of searching for valuable debris in the void between worlds. That life was over now, whether he helped the princess or not. The Krillians would never stop hunting him after what he had done to their Shadowhunters. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Help me reach my people," Zarathel said. "There is a Luminari outpost at the edge of this star system. If I can get there, I can contact my father and arrange for proper protection." Marcus checked their fuel reserves again. "It would be cutting it close, but they might just make it. And if we don't make it, then we will face whatever comes together," the princess said. "But Marcus, you should understand that helping me will change your life forever. There will be no going back to your old existence." Marcus looked at her sitting in the co-pilot's seat of his tiny escape pod, her skin glowing softly in the dim light of the instrument panels. She was the most beautiful and dangerous being he had ever encountered, and he was probably making the biggest mistake of his life. "Well," he said, adjusting their course toward the edge of the star system, "I always wanted to see more of the galaxy." The alarm screamed through the corridors of the merchant vessel Solitary Dawn as Marcus Chen pressed himself against the cold metal wall. His heart hammered against his ribs while he listened to the thunderous footsteps of the Krillian raiders stomping through the ship. The massive insectoid aliens had boarded his cargo hauler 3 hours ago, and now they were systematically searching every compartment. Marcus gripped his plasma cutter tighter. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was all he had. The tool had served him well during his 5 years as an independent salvage operator, cutting through twisted metal and debris from dead ships floating in the void. Now he might need it to cut through something very much alive. The footsteps grew closer. Marcus could hear their clicking mandibles and the wet sounds they made when they communicated in their alien language. He had seen what Krillians did to human prisoners. The lucky ones died quickly. A new sound reached his ears through the ship's ventilation system. It was faint but distinctly different from the heavy tread of the raiders. Someone was crying. The sound was melodic, almost musical, but filled with such pain and terror that it made Marcus's chest tighten, against every instinct screaming at him to hide until the raiders left. Marcus found himself moving toward the sound. He crawled through the maintenance shafts, following the ventilation ducts deeper into the ship. The crying grew louder, and now he could hear other voices. Harsh, guttural voices speaking in the Krillian tongue. Marcus reached a ventilation grate and peered through the slats. What he saw made his blood run cold. 3 Krillians stood in the cargo bay, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming under the harsh lights. They towered over a figure chained to the floor. At first glance, Marcus thought it might be human, but as his eyes adjusted, he realized he was looking at something extraordinary. The prisoner was clearly female, with a humanoid form that was both familiar and utterly alien. Her skin seemed to shimmer with an inner light, shifting between pale blue and silver like moonlight on water. Her hair was long and white as starlight, and even from this distance, Marcus could see that her eyes were larger than any human's, colored like deep violet gems. But what truly marked her as alien were the delicate, translucent fins that extended from her temples and the way her fingers ended in what looked like tiny crystals instead of nails. She was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, like staring directly into something too pure for the universe. The largest Krillian said something in its clicking language, and one of the others raised what looked like a neural prod. The alien princess flinched, and Marcus saw real terror in those violet eyes. She was going to be tortured, and from the way the Krillians were preparing their equipment, it was going to be slow and methodical. Marcus had always prided himself on being practical. He minded his own business, kept his head down, and survived in a galaxy that seemed determined to kill anyone foolish enough to venture beyond Earth's protective barriers. But looking at this beautiful, terrified being, something inside him snapped. He unscrewed the ventilation grate as quietly as possible and dropped into the cargo bay. The Krillians were so focused on their prisoner that they didn't notice him until he was already moving. Marcus triggered his plasma cutter and swept it in a wide arc, catching the nearest raider across the back of its legs. The superheated beam sliced through the alien's exoskeleton like it was paper. The creature screamed and collapsed, green ichor spraying across the floor. The other 2 Krillians spun toward Marcus, their compound eyes reflecting the light of his weapon. The larger one hissed something that didn't need translation and charged. Marcus had faced dangerous situations before, but nothing like this. The Krillian was 8 feet tall and moved with the terrifying speed of a natural predator. Its clawed arms reached for him just as Marcus rolled to the side and brought his plasma cutter up in a defensive position. The beam caught the alien across its torso, and Marcus felt a moment of savage satisfaction as the creature stumbled. But Krillians were tough, and this one wasn't finished. It backhanded Marcus with enough force to send him flying across the cargo bay. He hit the wall hard and felt something crack in his ribs. The 3rd Krillian was moving toward the princess with its neural prod raised. Marcus realized with growing horror that they intended to use her as leverage against him. He forced himself to his feet despite the pain shooting through his side and lunged forward. What happened next would replay in Marcus's mind for the rest of his life. As the Krillian brought the neural prod down toward the princess, she looked up at Marcus with those impossible violet eyes. There was something in her gaze, a kind of recognition that went deeper than gratitude. It was as if she was seeing not just who he was, but who he could become. Marcus reached the alien just as the prod made contact with the princess's shoulder. She screamed, and the sound was like breaking crystal. Something primal and protective exploded in Marcus's chest. He drove his plasma cutter deep into the Krillian's back, holding the trigger until the beam burned completely through its torso. The cargo bay fell silent except for the soft humming of the ship's systems and the princess's labored breathing. Marcus looked around at the 3 dead aliens, hardly believing he was still alive. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his weapon. The princess was staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. Up close, she was even more beautiful and alien than he had thought. When she spoke, her voice was like music played on instruments he had never heard. "You saved me," she said in perfect English, though her accent was unlike anything from Earth. "You could have hidden, you could have escaped, but you chose to save me." Marcus knelt beside her and began working on the energy chains that held her to the floor. "Couldn't just leave you here," he said, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "What's your name?" I am Zarathel of the Luminari, she replied. And you, brave human, what are you called? Marcus Chen, and I'm not brave. I'm just stubborn. He managed to get the chains open and helped her to her feet. She was tall, nearly matching his own 6-foot frame. We need to get out of here before more of them show up. But as they moved toward the exit, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something had just changed in his life forever. The way the princess looked at him, the way she had spoken his name, suggested that this rescue was only the beginning of something much larger and more dangerous than he could possibly imagine.